We are back once again with Erika Brown, the publisher and editor of The Cricket, talking all things Manchester by the Sea and Essex. How you doing, Erika?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Good, good.
We're well. Good.
Yeah, we're bracing ourselves.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Or actually,
We're
let me
stocking up.
reiterate
That's right, of course.
we braced ourselves. We're on the
We're
on the
doing
other
the work, Erika. We're doing the work.
Yeah.
We're doing the work. We were laughing about that. I was talking about something else, and I said, "What's that therapy thing that people say? We're doing the work."
All right, so right off the bat, school budget season is upon us. What can we expect?
Well, the school committee, the regional school committee, the Manchester Essex Regional School District, their school committee is at the end of their budget season. They started this a little earlier this year. I think we talked about this in the fall. Because budgeting, I think with any school district has become, tricky business, let's call it that. And and that was before COVID. So they gave their final budget, and Avi Urbis, who's the head of Director of Finance and Operations, and Pam Bodwin, the superintendent, presented sort of the near final budget. It's going to be finalized this week. It will be rock solid final, and nothing really is going to change. It's a $28.89 million budget, roughly. There are some tweaks that'll be made. But they started off with a big kind of wide gap of nearly $1 million, $983,000 to be exact. And what it means to be off the mark in this case is they shoot every year for a net plus 3.5%. Now you'd think, 5%, a 3.5% increase every budget cycle. And this is for FY23, that's what they call it. You'd think that was not, really, that seems like a lot, especially in a Proposition 2.5 world. Right. But it's the number that is extremely responsible, and it's supported by both towns. So that's their goal. That's the goal every year, and it's been the long-time goal. And in terms of Manchester Essex School District, they're right in the middle. They're super average as if you compared them to other school districts that are roughly their size and have essentially the same profile, community profile. So, they're not unusual, and yet they struggle. So they had this gap, and what I really think was interesting is, first of all, a couple things are out of their control completely. They're completely out of their control, and that they have to do with two things. One is predictably out of their control, and that's healthcare costs for healthcare insurance for staff and for retirees. And they tried to work through with that a little bit, but that's very hard to work with. And the other one is predictable in its utter unpredictability, which is school choice. Paying tuitions for students who are going to be going to another school district or into another place because of special needs. And those two numbers are really, really high and really hard. Put on top of that COVID, which you'd think grants were covering all the extra COVID PPE and all that other stuff. Not necessarily close, and it's coming in and they're doing a great job, but that's not, that was hard. So they came in, and here's what they started with. They started off with a net increase of 3.4%. So you'd think, okay, they're on budget. They still had to kind of squeeze that because the assessments, and that is in school districts, there's a formula that everyone agrees to that has to do with enrollment numbers of each town for kids, but it also has to do with other things as well, sort of tax dollars, real estate, et cetera. But it's a formula that it was agreed to in the regionalization agreement. Manchester is less than Essex this year for the second year in a row, and it's a surprise to Essex. So that 3.4% really meant that it was 1.9% increase for Manchester and 4.21% for Essex. Yeah. So Essex, this is a surprise. And imagine in your own household if suddenly you had this, double the cost of food or something one year, and you've already kind of locked in your budget for the year. Having that kind of surprise late in the game is very, very disruptive. So Essex has worked very hard to smooth out those things. And guess what? Manchester has had its share of kind of the shoe is on the other foot in past years for Manchester. So this is something that's kind of an equally shared cyclical issue, and it's been really interesting. So what they did was they trimmed the budget from the gulf of $983 to about $700,000. It kind of made the difference for this year, which is fantastic. There's still some work to be done. We'll see. But I think the fireworks are really going to happen next year, because next year is the year that they can't dip into reserves anymore. They're at the end of the line of nipping and tucking. They've cut everything, and they really need to start looking at this fresh. And they are all on board with doing so. Remember last year I told you that the FinCom over in Essex at the annual meeting got up and went rogue and said they weren't going to support the school budget? Do you remember that?
Remember that? Yeah, right.
So that's been brewing for quite a while. Well, guess what? The school committee, to their credit, started reaching out to Ben Buttrick, who is the chairman of this finance committee. Guy Bradford, remember that name is familiar. He is the Essex BOS member who ran from the FinCom in Essex, and he ran for Board of Selectmen, saying that the school committee budget was his #1 issue. They've been working with him. So now 4 months into working with them very, very closely, Essex is really, the finance committee and the BOS, they're really committed to kind of working this out and making it work properly. It's a much different tone. It's really nice. It's nice to be an observer and not to hear the any acrimony. So they're going to make their way, but it's going to be really interesting. I am so fascinated by school budgets, because how do you reconcile the fact that we live in a Proposition 2.5 world when there's a massive part of your operational budget as a municipality that is associated with something that at the very beginning is a point higher than that?
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's really unreconcilable from the street,
Yeah.
So, and also the school choice, the variability there, and the special ed costs, right? That's always a big ticket. But I just am fascinated that the two towns have to work this out. I mean, it's one thing for one municipality to deal with their own school district, but for two towns, I just think that's fascinating. Different populations, different.
Yeah, and from what I hear, regional school districts have their own unique challenges, and that's what I hear. There's definitely issues, and it's not about kind of getting along, which is kind of the vector you're going in with, which is exactly true. But there's a separate thing where there's a unique challenge to regionalized districts in Massachusetts and probably elsewhere that are unique to operating costs. And that's an issue. That's something I'd like to figure out over the next year. I'd also like to figure out, here's a I'll never forget, this is so funny. When I was, what tipped me off to this was, remember when we had the election forum with the planning board earlier this last year? And I had a forum with all the candidates. And one of the candidates, Sarah Creighton, said, we have a capacity problem. And I'll never forget it. She said capacity problem. She really stressed it. And she said, one, with water and sewer, although she then said, well, we're about to have our water and sewer moratorium lifted, so that won't be an issue anymore. She said, but we have a capacity issue with the school system. And I remember thinking when I heard that, we have fewer students than we in our district, much fewer students, almost like 300 fewer students today than we did 10 years ago. So where's the capacity problem? Do you know what I mean? Where is it? Yeah. I will be following up with her on that someday. But really what it is there's a cost. The cost has remained pretty stable, but enrollment has been going down. And there's a lot of very good reasons for that. I mean, Manchester is not alone in Essex. Yeah. So that I'd like to dive into that over the year. I mean, I think it's really interesting. Genuinely, I feel it's interesting. There's other stuff going on in the school that's more fun. Yeah,
right. I was going to say that, yeah. You want to mention how is morale in the schools, the student body being lifted now through winter sports?
Oh, yeah. We were talking about that. Yes, exactly. Well, one of the highlights of winter sports has been the boys basketball team, Boys Hornets. I mean, there's some really good stories going on, so I don't want to single them out, but they've had a remarkable season, and they're, as of this point that we're speaking, they're 9-1. So they're doing really well. They had a great game against Georgetown last week, and I believe Rockport this week. And so they're really doing well. They're winning, and the fans are pretty animated. But I think that there's just this general energy of people being really excited about things and getting back, theater and children's theater, the student theater. The middle school program of Annie is on, and there's a lot of excitement and buoyancy around that, and it's just really nice to see.
Yeah. So are people actually attending the games masked, and crowds are full, stadiums are full? That's really nice. That's great.
Yeah, and as the excitement goes up, I'm glad the COVID numbers are going down because I think people are a little on edge about what's safe and what's not. But I think the school's been handling it really, really well.
That's great.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And lastly, Erika, what is the latest with the senior center?
Yeah, the senior center in Manchester. There is a wandering people looking for a home.
Oh, wow.
No, the senior center
is not a cheerful one.
I've been hearing about the senior center for 3.5 years. And the school, there have been a couple of near hits, let's call it. The Cornerstone Church is a very old kind of historic church on School Street in downtown Manchester. It's a beautiful building. It's very large, but it's not on a particularly large lot, by the way. Not a lot of parking, but a big facility. And the town, about 1.5 years ago, put that property under agreement, and they have a right of first refusal for 5 years, and that clock is ticking. But Cornerstone Church is actually moving up to Upper School Street near the limited commercial district, and they are actually going through with new designs. They just went through the planning board successfully. I think there's one more hearing, and the Concom, and that's all going. But they're raising money to actually build their new spanky facility. So they're staying where they are in School Street while they raise money to move, and they're planning on that. They purchased the property, but they're still raising money for the actual structure. So that's one option. Another option is they've been talking to the Masons, the Masonic Hall behind Town Hall, which abuts Town Hall parking. So is actually a very good option. But they've been trying to do something with the Masons for maybe 5 years with no success. The Masons are a charitable organization, as you know. They own their very nice building. I hope they can make a deal. I don't know. Maybe they'll make a deal, but that's another option. For the record, the head of the Council on Aging has been on record as saying she doesn't want the Masons. She'd rather be at Cornerstone Church. So anyway, it's really coming to a sharpened place where they're finally saying we want to solve it. It feels like they want to solve the problem, the town. So I think they're going to really make a concerted effort. So that was going on this week for sure.
Well, they need a place to meet, for sure.
Exactly. Well, I think it would be really great. I mean, I've heard this from other people too, so it's not just me, but I've heard that people say, we should really have a combined facility, like a community center, council on aging, and then sort of an annex for town hall. Do you know what I mean? For bigger board meetings that are more animated, say there's a controversy or something and you want to have a public hearing or something like that. Something that's larger than that teeny little BOS, meeting hall in town hall. If you had a combined space like that, similar, Essex has that approach on their 3rd floor of their town hall. It's get there by an elevator. It's big, it's open, it's a nice space. And they use it for community-esque events for sure. They use it for meetings.
Another thing that comes.
Library is another wonderful one. The difference is there is a council on aging that is in a separate facility in Manchester. In Essex on Pickering Street. But anyway, it shows that there's this kind of need for a central, engaged community space that would be nice. So.
This actually totally surprises me. I would think that Manchester would have that, and particularly the senior center. They would have a senior center. You guys are always talking about the group of very old people who get the cane. Right?
Yeah.
So do they have a space? Where do they meet?
No, they don't.
How about a combined youth center and senior center?
Yeah, there you go.
Exactly. I kind of like the idea of having something that is kind of more of a collective because the
center?
A center. Yeah, exactly. Like the Masons work because the Masons don't use their building all the time. They use it like maybe, I don't know, once every 2 weeks or once a week. So it's perfect. They find the groups that have compatible needs and get them to work together.
I agree.
Solving all the world's issues, especially in Manchester and Essex. Erika Brown, thanks for your time again. We'll see you next week.
All righty, bye guys.
Interested in a sponsorship? Email sponsor@1623studios.org to learn more.